Your psychology is very strange to me, said Cotgrave, but I confess I like it. And I suppose that one might fairly deduce, from your premises, the conclusion that the real sinner might very possibly strike the observer as a harmless personage enough. Certainly, because the true evil has nothing to do with social life or social laws, or if it has, only incidentally and accidentally. It is a lonely passion of the soul, or a passion of the lonely soul, whichever you like. If by chance we understand it, and grasp its full significance, then indeed it will fill us with horror and awe. But this emotion is widely distinguished from the fear and the disgust with which we regard the ordinary criminals, since this latter is largely or entirely founded on the regard which we have for our own skin or purses. We hate a murderer because we know that we should hate to be murdered, or to have anyone that we like murdered. So on the other side, we venerate the saints, but we don't like them, as we like our friends. Can you persuade yourself that you would have enjoyed St. Paul's company? Do you think that you and I would have got on with Sir Galahad? So with the sinners, as with the saints. If you met a very evil man, and recognized his evil, he would no doubt fill you with horror and awe. But there is no reason why you should dislike him. On the contrary, it is quite possible that if you could succeed in putting the sin out of your mind, you might find the sinner capital company. And in a little while, you might have to reason yourself back into horror. Still, how awful it is if the roses and lilies suddenly sang on the coming morning, if the furniture began to move in procession, as in de Maupassant's tale. That is from the story The White People, which you can find in this Penguin Classics edition of Arthur Machen's The White People and Other Weird Stories. Your Sunday Penguin for today. So Arthur Machen, a tremendously influential writer. I felt it was only appropriate to do him because we did Sunday Penguins on M.R. James and on Algernon Blackwood. And those two, along with Edgar Allan Poe, who we will talk about another time, and Arthur Machen, were the four huge influences on modern horror. And they were probably the greatest horror writers to come before H.P. Lovecraft. And they were tremendously influential on H.P. Lovecraft, as well as horror writers even today. This particular Penguin volume, for example, has an introduction by Guillermo del Toro, the filmmaker, because Arthur Machen has had a tremendous influence on him and on his work. So you'll find Arthur Machen's influence all sorts of places. Really, really talented writer with a tremendous imagination. A unique man. He was born March 3rd, 1863, and he died March 30th, 1947. Now his big break came in 1894 when he wrote The Great God Pan, which was a huge sensation. A tremendous story. It's a really, really good story. It has its weak points. Great story though, The Great God Pan. Hard to talk about Arthur Machen without talking about The Great God Pan. Arthur Machen was a lot weirder, I think, than M.R. James and Algernon Blackwood. His stories are really strange, and they come from his unique worldview. He was a kind of Christian mystic, very, very religious man. And he did not like science at all. So, super religious guy who did not like science or progress. Sort of my opposite, actually. But that's okay. Great, great writer. And I love his work. But yeah, he was not a big fan of science or progress. He longed for a simpler time. And his view of evil kind of had a religious significance to it. Much like Algernon Blackwood, he found a lot of influence in nature and the natural world, but he seemed to find the natural world much more frightening than even Blackwood did. It was full of just awful things. The unrestrained natural world was very frightening, I think, to Arthur Machen, even though he did not like progress. Interesting fellow. His most famous work was The Great God Pan, and also the episodic novel The Three Imposters, and the story that is the headliner here, The White People, which is a great story. Very strange story. Can be a little difficult to understand if you just walk in blind and expect it to be just a regular story. It's not. It is really weird. Which is a story about a young, innocent girl who is seduced into witchcraft. That makes it sound a lot simpler than it is. But man, it's creepy. The White People. Creepy story. This volume of Arthur Machen was edited, of course, by S.T. Joshi, who does all of these Penguin horror volumes practically. And one thing I have to say about this Penguin classic, it falls short. It's very rare that Penguin is probably my favorite reprint house. They do my favorite classics usually, but they dropped the ball on this one, and I think we can actually lay it at S.T. Joshi's feet, I believe. I think it was his decision to do this strange thing. So they came up with this volume of Arthur Machen, and they should have, because Arthur Machen, he was a classic writer. His stuff, classics, definitely. Classics of horror and just classics of literature. But S.T. Joshi made the bizarre decision to not include Arthur Machen's most famous story, The Great God Pan. Now, as you can see, The Great God Pan is in this illustration. It's a wonderful cover of a statue of Pan hanging out here, as he properly should on a Penguin Classics edition. But that story is not in here, which boggles my mind. I believe he believed, or I think he even said that The Great God Pan has been anthologized to death, so he didn't need to include it in here. But so what? I mean, a lot of stories have been anthologized to death, The Dunwich Horror in H.P. Lovecraft, or in Algernon Blackwood, the Willows. Every anthology has the Willows in it. You don't think of putting a Blackwood volume out without the Willows in it. But for some reason, this does not have Arthur Machen's most famous story. This also falls short because, inexplicably, S.T. Joshi doesn't include the entirety of The Three Imposters, which he could have. It's not a long novel. The Three Imposters is an episodic novel that has a series of horror episodes strung together with kind of a framing device. And so it's often been chopped up and put into different anthologies as separate stories. Like this one has, what does it have? The Novel of the White Powder, for example, is often published as a separate story when actually it is part of The Great God Pan. It's a part of The Three Imposters, the episodic novel, Novel of the Black Seal, the same thing. So he certainly could have included the entirety of the novel, which would have been a great service to readers. Because a casual reader who's heard of Arthur Machen and maybe hasn't picked up every horror anthology in the world deserves to pick up the one Arthur Machen in Penguin Classics and get his best work or his most famous work. You don't get that with this. It is strange, the choices he made. And then you have some other stories in here like The Terror, which is a decent story. It's not as good as The Great God Pan. So there are some interesting choices with this particular volume. I'm glad, I guess, that Penguin has a volume of Arthur Machen. But they dropped the ball on it. But that's okay because Oxford Classics picked it up. So I am going to, for this Sunday Penguin, tell you, don't get this Penguin, which is a rare thing for me to do on the Sunday Penguin. I'm going to actually say, get the Oxford's Classics of The Great God Pan and Other Horror Stories, because it succeeds, this volume, everywhere that one fails. And you can get this in paperback, the Oxford edition, a really nice paperback you can get, an Oxford World's Classics version of this, because this one has everything. This has the entire Three Imposters. It has The Great God Pan and Other Stories. It has everything you want in an Arthur Machen volume, all in one place, in one book. And it's not like ginormous. This thing's what, 300 something pages? What is this? Yeah, I mean, it's not that much longer than this one. So yeah, it's an odd thing for me to recommend this over that, but this does have The Great God Pan, which was amazing. Story, very complicated and spooky and creepy story. About, it starts off with an experiment. These two heartless people and one particularly heartless surgeon takes this innocent young woman and experiments, does brain surgery so that she can see into the other world, the spirit world, and see the Great God Pan himself. And she does. She sees the Great God Pan, and of course, it destroys her mind. And the entire experience is just horrific. And this story picks up later with some other horrible events. And yeah, that story, The Great God Pan, is fantastic. And not the least because the villainess happens to go by the last name of Vaughn. So I like her a lot. And I like to pretend that we are related. Yeah, so The Great God Pan, man, you've got to read that story. It does rely too much on coincidence. This is true. A lot of his early work does. But it's fantastic. Same I could say for The Three Imposters, full of just great, terrifying stories. Very much in the style of Robert Louis Stevenson, as far as the how it reads. Just much more terrifying and disturbing. Great stuff. I mean, the horror in this volume is just in your face, gross, disturbing. I mean, it's serious horror that you'll find in Arthur Machen's stories. And it really disturbed people when these stories came out. They hugely successful. People kind of loved and loathed it. And there was lots of accusations of the Great God Pan, of course, being an immoral story because it hints at aberrant sexuality, among other things. But the thing is, Arthur Machen was frightened and horrified by exactly that. Anything aberrant, anything strange, anything that seemed unnatural to his rather rigid viewpoint was horrifying to him. And so he put all that stuff in his horror stories as objects of horror. It's interesting. But he was a really talented, really imaginative writer. Great stuff. I'm probably not doing him justice in this video. And I'm sorry for that because he's fantastic. Dark, creepy, just amazing, amazing horror fiction. It really has influenced everything in horror fiction. And if you're just interested in literature, if you have any special interest in Welsh literature in particular, you have to pick up Arthur Machen. So yeah, while I am happy that this exists, buy this one. You'll be glad you did. Okay, guys, I will see you tomorrow for Mythos Monday. And then on Tuesday, I've got a tag for you. So I'll catch you again next time. Bye, guys.